From the CNHT studios in Concord, New Hampshire, just a few blocks from the New Hampshire State House, this is
Law Talk.
I just want to circle back to one thing you said about economic migrants. It has been widely documented that the poorest of the welfare recipients in Western countries, and especially in the United States, live much better than most people in the third world, even the ones that are economically relatively advanced or well off because they work. And so why wouldn't you give up some third world hellhole and come to where even living off the state is better? But it's not only that. I mean, these are supposed to be proud people. What kind of pride is that? They're here to live off us as part of the overall task of infiltrating our society.
Well, the other thing it leads to is that people generally don't like being on welfare for long periods of time because it's humiliating. After a while, you start to feel useless. So here's the other part of the problem is that the longer these people, these migrants, are on welfare, the more resentful they will become, the more angry they will become. And it's not a mistake, it's not a coincidence that you see in many of these Western European countries radicalization of many young Muslim men. They turn to radical Muslim imams to explain to them why they're having problems, why they can't get jobs, why they're frustrated, etc., etc. And so they start adopting radical jihadist ideology, and then they start doing things like killing people. So all these things, I think, when you put them together, it adds up to a very bleak future for Western Europe, not least because neither the political class and in some sections, some parts of the population, large segments of just normal people, just don't care. They don't want to do anything about it because it's too hard. And this is the point. Once you start going down this path, harder and harder to turn back.
You talked about the Erfurt program, which I was not aware of, part of one of the German socialist parties way back when. But I see that almost the American equivalent, German spawned, was the Frankfurt School that settled first. It came out of Germany, settled in California, was so disgusted with the absolute freedom that they saw there, with the California lifestyle, they moved back to, Chicago. And their whole idea was, we can't do the typical Marxist stuff. Instead, we're going to do the Marxist culture takeover by going through all that they taught was to take over all of the high points of American culture. Do you see that has, now that it's 100 years old, basically, were they successful, and how do we undo that?
Well, when you look at for example, most higher education in the United States today, I don't know anyone who would describe it as being politically balanced. It's overwhelmingly left-wing. Conservative or free market professors are more or less an endangered species. And many of those who do have those convictions keep them very much to themselves because they're worried about either getting tenure or losing their job. And so they often write and focus upon very technical subjects and don't engage the types of ideas that they think need to be talked about. So the long march through the institutions has been very successful in the United States, as it has in the rest of the West as well. And unfortunately, what that means is that you have a lot of people going to universities and colleges, and they spend 3 years hearing this type of nonsense. And so they do literature, and they don't learn about literature, they learn about the class struggle that the literature is proposing. Or they do philosophy, and all they learn is the last 200 years of philosophical junk that's come out of Germany. I often like to say, some of the worst philosophical and ideological systems have basically been spawned by German professors over the past 200 years. And so I think a lot of people, when they send their children to university, they often are not aware that they're paying a lot of money, in some cases, to have their children indoctrinated in this type of nonsense. Now, a lot of people come out of university and they recognize, well, that's all nonsense, but I've got my degree and I can just go on with my life. But it also takes a while for some of these people to deprogram themselves from a lot of the stuff that they've heard and been taught in university. So in terms of dealing with this problem, I think the economics of higher education are going to start to take care of it, because we have too many colleges and too many universities in the United States right now Some of them are already starting to close because they don't have enough students. The quality of the programs is not sufficient to attract people. So you're having this phenomenon of universities and colleges closing in different parts of the United States. Now, the federal government will try and keep these things open as long as they can, because especially when you have a relatively left-wing administration, they like people hearing about this stuff, and they recognize that professors are one of their biggest support groups. But I think the economics of higher education are going to take care of this to a certain extent, not least because people will say to themselves, I'm spending $100,000 a year for my child to learn about Karl Marx, or $100,000 a year for my child to be told that America is basically a white racist criminal country built upon slavery. So I think already you're seeing a lot of people saying, I just don't think it's worth doing this. And so they're seeking out colleges and universities where they can be assured that it might even actually be a conservative message they hear, or it will simply be a more balanced message. So I think, to the extent that the higher education works in the marketplace, some of these things are going to be sorted out over time. But some of these places are going to be around for a while, and they will do a lot of damage.
Do you have any advice on how we can expand that message? My kids went to public school, and they would come home, and I would deprogram them. And being a conservative constitutionalist, it was pretty easy for me to teach them how to see that stuff. Now, most kids probably don't get that, because they don't have a right-wing blogger dad, and that's fine. But, it's a message that parents need to get, and they may not necessarily get it just from the economics. I think, do you see any way that we can advertise this to them, help them see it sooner?
Well, I think the good thing is that there are a number of organizations in the United States now that put out basically surveys of higher educational institutions. The Intercollegiate Studies Institute puts a book out every year which basically does a study of different colleges from a conservative viewpoint and says, okay, which ones are doing good things and which ones are bad things. So I often point people who have children going off to college, I often point them in the direction of those sorts of resources. And they do exist. They do exist at places like Intercollegiate Studies Institute, which is in your part of the world, places like the Heritage Foundation, even at the Acton Institute. I often have people calling me and saying, I'm thinking about sending my child to this college, and I'll say, well, sure, if you want your child to end up as a Marxist, fine, but here's some alternatives. So I think for parents, what I would say is conservative parents, or parents who just want their children not to be indoctrinated, to ask those people who spend time in this world for their views and their opinions on these things so that they can get some steering guidance about where to send their children and where not to send their children. And that type of thing, I think, can be very successful in making sure that people actually get a genuine university education instead of 3 years of ideological indoctrination.
We had talked about the rise of the pushback in Europe against the establishment on the Muslim invasion, if I'm going to call it that, period. Are we seeing the same thing here? We watch over the college scenes. We've seen Milo Yiannopoulos getting assaulted on campuses for talking conservatively, even though he fits the protected group, the homosexuality and all that stuff. We've seen it happen to Ben Shapiro. But in a greater standpoint, Donald Trump, with his absolute disdain for political correctness, and anybody who wants to use that against them, he just doubles down like Andrew Breitbart said to do, and just absolutely slaying them both on the left and also the establishment rhinos.
I do think that one of the reasons for the rise of Donald Trump is deep frustration with, A, the political class, generally, including many people on the right. But secondly, I think the political correctness is clearly something that a lot of Americans are fed up with. And there's aspects of Donald Trump's program that I don't particularly like. I don't actually think he's that much of a conservative. But what he is doing is giving voice to millions of Americans who are tired of being told that if you have reservations about immigration policy as it stands right now, you're a racist. Or if you think that social democracy and big welfare states are generally a bad idea, well, then you clearly hate the poor. Or if you have concerns about the particular mix of immigration, well, you're a whatever phobe they attach the word to. If you favor private enterprise, then clearly you are some sort of person who has contempt for those who are struggling in life. So I think that Trump has picked up on something, and it's certainly propelled him, I think, in many respects to prominence today. Will it last after the election? We'll see. We'll see, because the left, I think, has been pretty emboldened in the way that they're trying now to use legal means to shut down those who question different points of political orthodoxy as it stands right now. So, for example, we see the Justice Department, for example, trying to basically muzzle people who have skeptical views about climate change. I mean, this is the United States, where you have the First Amendment that protects free speech. So it's interesting that the left feels emboldened that they can try and do this now. So I think that to the extent that political correctness is suffocating so many things, has turned universities into little ideological factories for leftist indoctrination, in which it has made it impossible for some people to express their views, you can see there's a lot of frustration with this. And it's particularly at universities, where you see these precious millennial types who basically say that if you express a different view to me, you are being hurtful, and therefore in some way you're being violent towards me. And this whole language of microaggressions and all this nonsense. There has been, I think, a fair amount of pushback against that, as I said, expressed through Trump, but also frankly, the sheer contempt with which people are talking about these precious university students who think that if they hear a different view, it's somehow a personal attack upon them. And I often say universities are places where you should go and have a genuine mixture of views, where people can argue their views, where people can present their ideas, and you're free to do that. That's one of the purposes of going to university. It's not to be to be coddled and given safe spaces in which you can be shielded from the fact that not everyone else in the world is a muddle-headed leftist.
University is a place where you not only refine your ability to learn, but refine your ability to deal with things and debate, and it's just not happening. Right. I want to quickly circle around to something you said about the radicalization. I believe that part of the problem is that you've got existing populations that, thanks to the welfare left, have become disenfranchised and disgruntled. But I think there's more to it than that. I think that the Muslim immigrants specifically come to attach themselves to Western society and infiltrate it. Let me just point out to you that Britain has got Indians, Pakistanis, Chinese, and Jamaicans. Guess which ones become radicalized?
You know, there was a study, and maybe you saw it just recently, that came out of a study of Muslim views and attitudes in Britain, and it's actually quite frightening. And the people who commissioned the study were by no means sort of very conservative people. In fact, they were quite left-wing people. But they were shocked at the results. Something like 52% of them wanted, of the people that they surveyed, wanted Sharia law. Their attitudes towards things like freedom of speech and basic constitutional rights, other such things, were very, very negative. And it's interesting, as you say, because it's not, these are the children of migrants. So these are not the people who've come to Britain or gone to Britain seeking economic opportunity or whatever. These are their children. And they are basically deeply alienated from the societies in which they find themselves. These are the ones who turn towards the violence, who embrace these radical jihadist ideas. And so that's a problem. That tells you that, I think this is what it tells you. It tells you that multiculturalism doesn't work. It tells that you cannot have immigration and multiculturalism and big welfare states. I happen to think that immigration, generally speaking, tells you that people want to go to a country because they think there's more opportunity there than there is in their own country. So immigration should normally be a good thing, but it only works. It only works if it goes along with assimilation and no big welfare states, because mass immigration plus multiculturalism plus big welfare states is a recipe for the mess that you see unfolding in Western Europe right now. Immigration plus assimilation plus small welfare state can often be enormously beneficial for a country.
Yes, Ed Nail from the Coalition of New Hampshire Taxpayers. You said something about the left being emboldened by their success, and that's something I see as a plus, because the more emboldened they are, the crazier the stuff they do is. You know, the transgender bathroom stuff that's coming out now is really turns people against them, and I believe, and I always sell this to people, that their urge to control the debate in colleges because they're not that intellectually nimble. They
I think
learn
that's right,
something.
because what they do is they try to shut down discussion.
Right.
And a group that tries to shut down discussion in universities is usually a group that realizes that their arguments aren't so strong, that they're not convincing people, so they're going to intimidate people.
And that's their opportunity in a closed society like a college town. You know, everybody basically is groupthink. They're same age. They've come from the same political background. They can get away with that there, but at some point in time, they have to enter the real world. And when we have guys that are going to college and working for the summer I'm a lumberjack, logger. When they come to us for a couple months of work, I try and pound it into them. That they may not be as smart as they think they are. I have a guy who was going to school, graduating with a degree in environmentalism, and I asked him about photosynthesis. And he said he
didn't know what it was.
He probably wasn't there when they talked about that. And I said, in ninth grade, I know what photosynthesis is, and I can explain it to you now. And you've just paid thousands of dollars to not learn the most basic principle, basic aspect of life on Earth. And you've got a degree in environmentalism. So I do that as much as I possibly can.
Sure, I can give you another example. I remember during the Occupy Wall Street. Remember those people, Occupy Wall Street?
Yeah.
I remember literally walking down Wall Street and seeing a young woman walking along, and they were all protesting. But this young woman was carrying a sign saying, "I have a degree in LGBT studies and I can't get a job." And I thought to myself, well, you've probably paid. I felt sorry for this woman, because I thought she's probably paid a lot of money or is in a lot of student debt for this worthless degree. And she has somehow developed the expectation that someone is obliged to employ her, despite the fact that study an LGBT degree in whatever probably doesn't really equip you to do anything productive.
My suggestion would be stand-up comedy.
Well, this is the thing. So we have this is the other part of the problem, which I think universities are running into. I happen to think that a good liberal arts education is a wonderful thing, that it can open your mind to the great richnesses of in literature and history and philosophy of the West and Western civilization. I think that's a very valuable thing. But I think a lot of people are coming out of college now and realizing, well, I did my Foucault and I studied postmodern thinking and all that, and really I think I've come out knowing less about the world than before I went in. So I think this is another thing which is hurting a lot of these universities. There's a growing sense that a lot of what is being taught is not only wrong in the sense of philosophically illogical, whatever, but also doesn't equip them to do anything after they leave college. And then they wonder why they can't get jobs.
Putting an employer's hat on from time to time, you're looking for somebody who knows how to learn, who's a good generalist if you're looking to hire people to do difficult stuff. But those degrees in LGBTQ studies are, to my mind, the equivalent of a scarlet letter. It says, "Here there be dragons," and she probably is. But more to the point, you don't want to hire somebody who's taken a degree in how to cause trouble.
Right. And you would be saying that you'd also had some serious questions in your mind about the judgment of that person. Why are they choosing to do something like that when it can't possibly help them in life, except unless you're a Marxist who thinks that this is all about an exercise in consciousness raising. But I think you're right. For an employer, would be asking serious questions. Do I really want to take on a person who has majored in, radical feminist studies?
Dr.
So
Gregg,
really want to hire someone like that.
we're actually running out of time. I want to thank you for spending so much time with us. How can people reach you if they would like to?
I think the best thing to do is go to the Acton Institute website, acton.org, or you can find my books on Amazon.com. Just type my name, Samuel Gregg, into the search engine, and you'll find a lot of, I hope, interesting books that will come up that would be interesting to your audience.
All right. Thanks so much for taking time with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye. All right. We got to go. Stay tuned.